Hello. So for those of you who may know, you may have seen my Puss in Boots video essay for like a couple of days on my YouTube channel before it completely disappeared off the face of the earth. Well, that's because Universal slapped me in the face and said no more fun, and decided to not only block my video, but also reject my appeal to, have my video up in the first place, even though it's protected under fair use. So therefore, I decided to re-edit my video to make it more copyright friendly, I guess. Not only did I use less footage than I did in the previous time that I uploaded this video, but I also made sure to drastically change the footage that I used to the point that hopefully it doesn't get detected by the content ID thing that YouTube has. I had to do a lot of degenerate shit to the footage, so I apologize in advance, but this is the best that I could do to still communicate the same points that I wanted to make while also, still being able to use footage without getting blocked again. So, yeah, that's it. Hope you guys enjoy. I'm gonna be honest, when I first heard that DreamWorks, the legendary animation company responsible for masterpieces like Boss Baby Back in Business, and Boss Baby Family Business was going to make a sequel/reboot to Puss in Boots, I couldn't have given less of a shit if my life depended on it. Don't get me wrong, as a fan of both film and memes, I live and die by the Shrek trilogy, but the Puss in Boots spin-off was kind of a meh, nothing movie. Part of what I love about Shrek is how all the films in the trilogy serve as some sort of parody of classic fairy tales, but with Puss in Boots, there isn't really a parody angle, as the film more or less played everything straight, making for a much less interesting and engaging movie. I mean, it wasn't bad by any means, but not something I'd ever watch again, much less see a sequel to. So, when I heard that a new Puss in Boots movie was being announced, I just couldn't give the slightest of fucks, and even after watching the trailers for this movie and seeing the Spider-Verse style animation that was incorporated into this film, I wasn't 100% sold. I wasn't also completely swayed when this movie got a high critical and audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, because that honestly means nothing to me. I mean, fucking Minions: The Rise of Gru had both a high critical and audience score on this site, so this means jack shit to me. However, when I saw that all my friends on Letterboxd, people's opinions I actually listen and respect, started giving this film incredibly high scores, I got super curious. Therefore, I decided to give this new Puss in Boots movie a chance. I went down to my local theater, bought a ticket, and just see what exactly all the fuss is about with Pussy and Bootsy. And after having sat through the entire thing and sitting long and hard about what I saw, I can safely conclude that this is not only the best animated film of 2022, but it is also easily the best film in the entire Shrek franchise, as I absolutely fucking adored this movie. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish completely blew me away, and in so many ways that I just didn't expect the film to do so. Like, the movie just oozes so much passion and love and craft that I honestly don't know where to fucking start, so let's just start with the big elephant in the room, and that's the animation. My fucking Christ, the animation is fucking orgasmic to look at. Holy God. This film easily has some of the most stylistic animation I've seen, not just this year, but in the last few years, and it's so vibrant and full of color and pop that even if you muted this entire film, you could still follow what's going on with the story. That's how expressionist this movie's animation is. The film isn't just any random CG animated bullshit that you'd find Disney or Illumination sharding out. This is a movie that was clearly made with a lot of love and labor, and the end result is an animated movie that looks more like a pop-up storybook illustration with a painterly style design come to life more than a grounded animated style that you're used to from DreamWorks. In terms of its stylistic presentation, The Last Wish has more in common with films like The Tale of Princess Kaguya, Wolfwalkers, and obviously Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse than it does with any movies in the Shrek trilogy. Speaking of Spider-Verse, it's very obvious that movie served as a major influence on Puss in Boots' production, as the look and presentation of this film very much mirrors what Spider-Verse did, and this isn't the first time that DreamWorks adopted this form of animation, as their previous film, The Furry Movie, The Bad Guys, also had a similar stylistic look. But I think what separates that furry movie with this furry movie is that, unlike The Bad Guys, where the flashy animation is mostly used to distract you from realizing that the story's just the most uninteresting thing fucking ever, the story in this new Puss in Boots film is so well realized and fleshed out, and in general just so fucking engaging, that at times I honestly forgot I was watching a kid's film, because this movie has some really excellent writing. This is especially the case when it comes to the deeper thematic elements that this new Puss in Boots film explores, because the movie is really unafraid to get into some dark and heavy themes. And while the Shrek trilogy has never been afraid to talk about some pretty adult and mature messages about topics like depression, loneliness, imposter syndrome, and other mental illnesses that most crippling Zoomers go through on a daily basis, they have always prioritized being comedic parodies/memes of classic fairy tales over everything else. And there's nothing really wrong with that. But in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, it stands out because while there are definitely parodies of fairy tales sprinkled throughout and enough hilariously crude adult humor that would make Shrek proud, this is a movie that is more interested in exploring these themes about death, fear, finding fulfillment in life, and overall happiness and self-satisfaction with who you are instead of pretending to be something that you're not. The Last Wish has more in common with DreamWorks movies like Kung Fu Panda 2 or How to Train Your Dragon 2 than it does any film in the Shrek trilogy, and the biggest reason is because they're all incredibly emotional and mature sequels that dig deep into the psyches of their main characters and give them the push they need to overcome their emotional trauma and struggles. And the biggest and most effective way these movies pull this off is with a scary, terrifying villain, and in the case of The Last Wish, that terrifying villainy is in the form of death.
And I don't mean it metaphorically or rhetorically or poetically or theoretically or in any other fancy way. I'm death, straight up.
Out of every new character they introduced, out of every concept they explored, out of everything in this film in general, The Last Wish's villain, Death, is easily not only one of my favorite characters in this entire film, but easily the best thing about this movie in general. I mean, the very first minute they introduced this character alone is worth praising. The way he just randomly and casually appears into Puss's life, the way he easily kicks Puss's ass in this quick 2-minute sword fight, this really intense and visually striking moment where Death lands a blow on Puss, blood starts dripping from his face, and looks at Death with absolute fear and horror. This is such an incredible way to introduce a villain, and this is where Death stands out from the rest of the villains in the Shrek franchise, because while villains like Lord Farquaad and the Fairy Godmother were definitely intimidating villains, they are never the most essential figures in Shrek's character arc. But Death is different. He isn't some cool badass guy that kids can gawk at or push to fight occasionally. He is a looming, terrifying force that is always watching, that is always one step behind Puss whether he realizes it or not. Even when he's not on screen, you can feel his presence throughout this entire movie, so there is rarely a moment where the characters have time to breathe. His limited screen time also makes his appearances that much more exciting and terrifying, because the few moments he does show up, you know that shit is about to hit the fan. And Puss knows that more than anyone. It's why he tenses up whenever Death appears. It's why he runs away terrified, desperately trying to prolong his last life, hopelessly trying to escape his inevitable doom. Hell, it's why Puss gives up the mantle of Puss in Boots in the fucking first place. He is so afraid of death, both literally and metaphorically. He is so afraid of dying that he's willing to run away like a coward and make up excuses for himself instead of actually facing his inner demon head on. As Kitty Softpaws mentions, he's so obsessed with his status as a legend that he can't really appreciate anything of actual value and significance. Puss deals with very dark and mature concepts, something that rivals what Hiccup and Poe faced in their respective sequels. He has to accept the fact that he's not immune to death or fate or destiny or whatever you want to call it, and it doesn't really matter how legendary his status is, because what's the point of being a legend if you don't have anyone to share that spotlight with? What's the point of having extra lives if you aren't grateful for any of them? These are the questions that Puss is constantly tasked with answering, and it's not until his final confrontation with Death does he finally have the courage to answer these questions, the resilience to honestly answer these questions. And that's exactly how he's able to defeat Death in the final battle, not because he became better at sword fighting or he got extra lives like a fucking Mario game or some other bullshit. He was able to defeat Death by finally learning to value life, and I think this is the main takeaway from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish more than anything. We're all not as fortunate as Puss in that we have 8 other lives to spare in case we fuck up the one. We only have this one life, and now that Puss has been brought to our level and finally sees what we see, he figures, fuck it, if this is the only life I get to have, then I'm gonna make the most of it. This is how he defeats Death, and what's surprising is that Death respects this decision. He respects this new person that Puss has become. Like Death mentions in the film, he came to kill this arrogant, self-absorbed asshat obsessed with his status, not this humble, mature being. And while there will come a time when Puss has to face Death again, at least he can enjoy his life before that day comes. As Death says to Puss before leaving, live your life, live it well. And I think that's something that we can all learn, we can all take away, not just Puss. You see, throughout The Last Wish, one of Puss's mantras is that he laughs in the face of death. And by the end of the film, he lives up to his mantra, but maybe not in the way that he thought. He laughs at the face of death, not by kicking its ass in a duel, but by learning to value the one life he has left with the people he values most. Puss wins and overcomes the odds not as a perfect immortal legend, but as a flawed yet human character. DreamWorks didn't have to go this hard when making a sequel to a fucking Shrek spinoff, but they did, and the end result is a goddamn masterpiece, and for that, I am forever thankful.